Welcome to Garden Success with Skip Richter, the show designed to help you have a bountiful garden and a beautiful landscape. Call in now with your lawn and garden questions at 979-845-5689 or email your questions to gardensuccess@tamu.edu. And now, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter.
Well, hello and welcome to Garden Success. We are normally a call-in show. You hear me giving out the number, but we're not going to do that today because we're coming to you by tape. I have a very special guest in the studio. We'll be back live again next week. So if you have some emails you want to send in the meantime, that's good. I will jump on those next week, and we can talk about whatever your questions are then. Our special guest today is a friend of mine, Jay White. Jay is the managing owner, chief cook, bottle washer, all the above for Texas Gardener magazine.
That is true.
Hey, welcome to the show, Jay.
Thank you, Skip. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me back. It's always fun.
Well, it is fun, and we're going to learn a lot today, I can tell you that. Also, we're going to have some fun, I think, in the process. First of all, just to start, there's probably some listeners out there who have been living under a rock who haven't heard of Texas Gardener magazine. So tell us a little bit about the magazine, your goals, how you aim the magazine compared to other things.
Well, so like you say, if you're a gardener, I'm always surprised. You know, we get out, we talk. That's how we promote the magazine, as we visit with master gardener groups, garden clubs, and all of that. And I'll always say, how many people take the magazine or have heard of the magazine? And it's not a unanimous show of hands. And so I am surprised. There are, we've been around 43 years. I mean, Texas Gardener was started in 1981 by Chris Corby in Waco. And he did it for 37 years, and then my wife and I bought it from him as I was getting ready to retire from my, I like to say, air quotes, my real job.
Yeah.
And but anyway, now, you know, we're running Texas Gardener. We're having a blast. And I think the thing that has kept us around for 43 years is because we have people like you that write for us. You know, if you don't know about Texas Gardener, we are a bi-monthly magazine. And while we're a pretty magazine, I think people like to think of gardening magazines as pretty magazines. We're a pretty magazine with a education mission. And I really think that's why we stay around, because people trust us, because all of our writers are degreed working horticulturalists in the state of Texas. So we are all Texas all the time. And we have writers in most of the main regions of Texas. And so, I mean, through the years, people have just learned that they can trust our writers. It's nothing special that I do.
Yeah.
I'm just lucky to be friends with a bunch of really, really good horticulturalists.
Well, you really do. You know, when it comes to things like vegetable gardening, Patty Leander over in the Austin area, she lives and sleeps vegetables. She knows what she's talking about. You got Greg Grant on there, which I don't know how you managed that one, but Greg.
And we've had Greg for 35 years. That's amazing. He's barely 35.
Yeah. He must have paid you a $20 bill.
Yeah.
Let's see. Lisa Whittlesey has done some writing for you on youth gardening and the Junior Master Gardener program.
Yeah, that has been a really big deal for us. When Sally and I took over the magazine, not only did we want to encourage education, but we wanted to encourage people, our readers especially, because our readers are kind of in that 50 to 70 demographic. So most of them have kids or grandkids and all. And we wanted them to have the tools to take their kids and grandkids outside, get them involved in horticulture early on, get them excited about it. And so Lisa does a article for us every issue called Little Green Thumbs, and it's great. I mean, if you've got the grandkids, you don't know what to do with them, turn to the back of the magazine, and she will have something fun and horticultural for you.
That's great. One of your taglines is by Texas gardeners for Texas gardeners. I think that principle is also part of why the magazine is successful.
It is, and I truly believe that. And I got a call, you know, my sponsors will like this, but I got a call from a lady this week. People like to call and chat. And even our ads we try to focus on Texas producers and
companies.
Texas companies and all. And I had a lady call in and said she really appreciates that because she likes to know that these products are not only made here, but they're going to work here. And so she said she really felt like that even the advertisements that we had provided an educational benefit.
Well, you know, we in Texas are very proud of our state, and we will be glad to drone on incessantly about the wonderful many aspects of Texas. But I think that kind of loyalty is unique among the states. I'm not saying nobody in any other state is proud of their state. I'm just saying down here, it's like there's a bumper sticker. I'm from Texas. What country are you from?
Yeah.
That sort of tells it. But along those lines, I don't know that our listeners recognize just how fortunate we are to have a magazine by gardeners in Texas, for gardeners in Texas. Jay, you and I have talked before, but you can explain it better. As you go across the country, there are not a lot of gardening magazines for states, right?
That is true. So when we bought the magazine 5 years ago, there were 37 regional gardening magazines.
Across the country.
Across the country, you know, Oklahoma Gardener, Arkansas Gardener, Louisiana Gardener, Texas Gardener, and all of that. And just the last 5 years, that number has dwindled down to where there's just 5 left. And one thing that we're incredibly proud of is Texas Gardener is the only one that is a for-profit magazine. And the other ones, like they have one in California Gardener, it's sponsored by the floral department or the floral growers there.
Okay.
And then the one that they have in Pennsylvania and the one that they have in Minnesota, they're sponsored by the arbological societies, the horticultural societies. So these are all kind of like add-ons. So like if you join the Master Gardeners and you automatically got a subscription to Minnesota Gardener. That's kind of what happens with them. And so we're really proud of the fact that people stick with us year after year after year, because I do think we have good, reliable, trustworthy content.
That's good.
And so we're really proud of that.
Yeah. So you guys have a digital edition online? So
We do.
You can choose to get either or?
You know, I have to be careful when I get kind of salesy, so I'll just kind of tone it down a little bit. But I will tell you, the more that I personally use Texas Gardener, when I'm putting the magazine together, when I'm trying to research things, I use the digital edition. I truly believe it is an incredible tool because, number one, if you're a serious gardener, every January, February, we do an issue on tomatoes. A 2,500-word, in-depth look at some aspect of growing tomatoes. Well, if you get a digital subscription, you get 10 years past issues of Texas Gardener. So all of a sudden, for the price of a digital subscription, you can go back and really do a deep dive into your love of tomatoes. Right. Or a recent thing that we did by Keith Hansen was on extending the azalea bloom time based on variety selection. You got 10 years of azalea articles by a really good azalea grower in East Texas.
Yeah, that's true. And by the way, Keith, he's retired from Extension, but he used to be the horticulturist there in Tyler.
Yeah, Smith County.
Yeah.
And so,
well, that is true. That's a nice benefit. As you've looked at subscribers in your time with the magazine, have you noticed any trends or any changes, or are we seeing more of new gardeners? Are we seeing more? You see what I'm asking?
Oh yeah. So I love when we hear from people, and we hear from people almost every week that will call in and say, I have got every issue of your magazine. And we love those people. So, I'm so proud that they have stuck with us year after year and they continue to find value from the magazine. But, ever since COVID hit, things have changed. And so COVID kept a lot of people home, and it stirred an interest in gardening, healthy eating, things like that. And so gardening really started taking off with a younger demographic. And now, with the economy being a little uncertain, people are kind of nervous about that. Historically, if you look at research done by Charlie Hall and other people, then you'll see that when the financial part of our country or our economy is kind of rocky, there is a big uptick in the interest of growing food at home and things like that. And so we're really seeing that now. We are getting so many new subscribers that are younger people. And when I say younger people, it can be any age, but primarily we're talking about people that have young kids.
Right.
Because not only are they interested in growing healthy food for themselves, but they really are concerned about giving their children healthy food. And then the other thing, a lot of people like having the ability to know how to get their kids outside and involved, because not only does it grow healthy food, it grows healthy habits.
There you go.
It lets them, have a love, begin to have a love and a sense of wonder. It's I love the sense of wonder. I mean, the other day I have got this, what do you want to call it? A dwarf lime that I'm trying.
Okay.
So I'm trying a dwarf lime tree. And I went outside and I was watering it, and I looked down and it had a caterpillar on it. And I was like, oh, I don't recognize that caterpillar.
Did it look like bird poop?
No, it did not look like
It was not
bird
that
poop.
one.
It was not that one. And I haven't figured it out yet, but it was fuzzy and it had a long thing off of its tail or whatever. But it gave me it was like, wow, I don't know that caterpillar, but I know it likes citrus. And so that's going to help me figure out.
There you go.
And it's just, that always gives me a sense of wonder. I've had that little citrus tree 2 weeks, and somehow in 2 weeks, the right butterfly found that tree, laid an egg, and a caterpillar emerged.
It is a wonder.
And so...
Yeah, it's those things are really, really nice. I've seen over my career, back a long time ago, before I started as a horticulturist, in the 70s especially, there was a real movement toward gardening. And you watch those things kind of ebb and flow. I mean, there's always gardeners and, and whatnot, but it's suddenly, and I've noticed once or twice and recently, I see a lot of maybe young moms that want to get out in the garden with the kids, moms and dads, but they don't have that grandma's garden experience that another
like you
decade,
and my generation.
All right, well, yeah, grew up with, and so they're coming to Extension, AgriLife Extension Service. They're looking at places like Texas Gardener, and it's encouraging because you just see a whole new generation of gardeners. I know a lot gardeners probably skew a little to the older side just because it's one of those things that as you get ready to retire and do things, you have a little more time in the yard and whatnot. But they're the wide span of ages that encourages me a lot. And I don't want to make this it's not going to be a 1 hour commercial for Texas Gardener, but I do want to say something along those lines. There are some beautiful magazines out there in gardening, national magazines. I don't have to name them all. They're on the checkout stand when you go through the grocery store. But when you read those, you see pretty pictures and inspiration, but they may be talking about the forsythia or the lilacs or something that doesn't grow here. And a lot of them are not so hand-to down in the dirt. And with the magazine, we're talking about Texas Gardener, it's like you pick it up and you learn, and there are pretty pictures, of course, but you kind of can set it down and go do that out in the garden today because it's timed that way and it's written that way. You have your writers across the board are just really practical, and as you said, very, very intelligent and informed in terms of knowing the craft they're writing about.
Yeah, that is true. And one thing else that I really like about a lot of them, like in the food articles, a lot of times we'll have a tip in there or a recipe, like how to preserve it or how to cook it, especially with the herbs and things like that. So it really is. It is a useful tool.
Patty is really good about that in her vegetable writing.
And seed sources.
And seed sources, too, yeah. So, where do you get this thing? Well, that's cool. Well, I'd like to ask you a question. I always am curious about this when I visit with experienced gardeners, but what are some things, Jay, that you wish you knew when you began gardening that you've learned either you have a horticulture degree and your many years of experience that you know now, but man, if I could go back and tell the guy that.
So there's so many things, but I think the main thing that I've learned, and you get inspiration from different places, but have you seen Jurassic Park?
Uh-huh.
You know how in Jurassic Park when the dinosaurs are reproducing and they can't figure out why because they made them all female? Well, old Goldblum, Jeff Goldblum, says something like, life finds a way. And that's very inspiring to me in the garden, because what I take from that is I get so many people that call in, especially young gardeners. So I got a question the other day, and it said, it's March 20th, and I didn't get my tomatoes out on March 15th. Is it too late? Have I missed my window? And the thing that I tell people is these plants want to live. Mm-hmm. And if you will just give them half a chance, if you'll get them out close to those recommended dates and you'll give them close to that amount of water that you think they need and all, you'll be surprised. I mean, life finds a way. These plants truly do want to grow for you.
Yeah.
So kind of loosen up. Mm-hmm. I mean, look at your average planting dates and things like that. Understand and know those, but also know that there's a lot of flexibility out there.
Okay, that's
don't
a good one.
be afraid to try.
Don't be afraid to try.
And what's the worst case, Skip? What happens if I plant a tomato on March 31st? What's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Man, don't get as many tomatoes, maybe.
That's right. You're not going to get as many tomatoes. Mm-hmm. It might get too hot and die. Yeah. But you lost a tomato but gained a lot of knowledge.
Well, one way I like to put, what you're saying is, I see gardening as using an Etch-a-Sketch, and that includes landscaping. Remember those things where you tried to go left, right, up, or down, and inevitably your brain turned it the wrong way and you messed up your picture?
Right.
What do? You hold it upside down and shake it. That's
right.
called a rototiller.
There you go.
So if you don't like it, if it got eaten up by bugs or diseases, just clear it out and plant again. That's the annual cycle of gardening that just makes it new. And I think gardening keeps us young.
I do too.
And I see that because there's always hope. When you pick up the dried detritus in a seed packet and look at those and know that is a bunch of tomatoes.
That's right.
For making ketchup or canning or whatever you're planting. There's a hope when you put that in the ground, and every year is going to be better next year. You have you learn, you get good advice, and I think that's cool. So your number one things you wish you knew was that nature finds a way.
Nature finds a way. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Get out there and do things.
Don't be afraid to fail. Yeah.
And just FYI, plan on the thing that you said is that gardening is hope. Mm-hmm. And one of the quotes I found a long time ago that I like, and it says, "No garden is ever better than next year's."
Is that it? Yeah, I like that. I like that.
So we're always hopeful.
So what else might you wish that you had known back when you first began?
Well, I give a talk, and it's called Growing Great Gardeners. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like the 4 or 5 things that I really think separate good gardeners from great gardeners.
Okay.
And so I think I'm a pretty good gardener. I don't even know if I consider myself a great gardener. But there are just certain things that when you get together and you talk to an older or a more experienced gardener, there's just things that they're going to know that they've incorporated into their daily lives.
Okay.
And one thing that I tell people, one of the first things that you need to do if you're going to think about starting a new garden or whatever, you need to find out what USDA hardiness zone you are.
Okay.
And what that hardiness zone does, it's kind of based on, your extreme temperature raises, your extreme cold, and your extreme heat, but it also works in to your last frost date. So your average last frost date. And so you need to understand when that is because if you're going to be planting annuals, it's not such a big deal with perennials. Perennials have things that are built into them that allow them to take a little bit of cold. Mm-hmm. But your annual vegetables, I heard Greg Grant say one time that when you're planting a vegetable garden, you're planting a bunch of thoroughbreds. These things have been bred to produce as much food as they can in a period of less than a year. I mean, a lot of these annuals that we plant, your green beans, 4 to 6 months, they are completely done.
Right.
You have planted those early, they've produced early, and then they burn up and they're done. And so because of that, you have to know when to get those things in the ground. To me, that is the biggest thing that I think gardeners miss is that you will have much more luck if you plant these things on time than if you worry about how many cups of organic fertilizer to put out on a 10-foot row. I mean, just know you got to get them in the ground early or at the right time, get them producing, and you understand you're going to have to feed and water them.
Yeah.
But if you put them in too late, there's no amount of food or water that is going to push that plant into additional production. I mean, it's going to actually have declining production.
That's true.
Yeah.
So zones are very important. Knowing our seasons. People that move to our area from, let's say, the Midwest or California or New Jersey or wherever,
Right.
they are used to planting tomatoes at a completely different time, and so readjusting and recognizing that we have this thing called summer that they don't experience, north of the southern tier of states, that really changes. Knowing that helps them avoid, the disappointment of
Right.
success. Any other thoughts about
Well,
things maybe you wish you knew?
Along that line of what you just said, we do have summer in Texas. We have real summer in Texas. And sometimes real summer in Texas comes like it did last year on the 1st of April, and it goes to like 100 degrees and stays there for 100 days. So we have real heat that we have to worry about managing. And then if you want to have a fall garden, we also occasionally have real winter. And so I think one of my second biggest tips that we have is that you want to be a good manager.
Okay.
And being a good manager is understanding that. It's if you know that your last freeze date is going to be March 15th, and you understand that green beans can go in a little bit early or whatever, so you're going to plan on planting around, say, March 1st in a lot of our area here in the Brazos Valley or whatever, then you know that if you wanted to be an organic gardener, you needed to get some organic matter worked into that soil back in January. So do what you need to do when it needs to be done. So work your organic matter in 2 or 3 months early because, as you know, organics, they don't work instantly. They're your original slow-release fertilizer.
That's how the forest floor
Yeah.
turns living or dead organic materials into soil.
That's
back
right.
into the soil.
That's right.
Yeah.
And on your forest floor analogy, I like that too because we get a lot of calls from people that are concerned about mushrooms and slime molds and things like that. And that's just nature being nature. That's what happens. If you walk through a forest, you're going to have the mushrooms popping up. You're going to have a slime mold here, and that is a perfectly natural part of the process. So that's, to me, are kind of the advanced techniques. You kind of learn that kind of stuff, as you advance in your gardening skills. But if you're starting out, you can get the general advice of find the sunniest spot on your place,
Right.
create the best soil that you can. But primarily, it's be a good manager. Read and understand that if you're going to plant on March 1st, you really need to start preparing the soil probably January 1st, at the latest February 1st.
I like to say spend $1 on the brown stuff before you spend $1 on the green stuff, or at
Yes.
least spend those $2 at the same time.
Yeah.
Because to plop a plant into unprepared soil, it's just you're on your way to disappointment because about 80% of success has happened when that plant or seed goes in. You've chosen a sunny or a shady spot. The plant's going to have an opinion about that.
Right.
It's either well drained or it's not, and it's going to have an opinion about that. The soil nutrients have either been incorporated or they haven't. You've chosen a variety that may or may not, and you've chosen a planting time. And so all the things we would do afterwards that we think of as taking care of the garden, they fade in comparison to the importance of soil first and
Right.
getting that right and getting the location, build the raised beds, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's another thing that I just like to stress because, if you don't do that, that's where people say, well, I don't have a green thumb. And I believe there are no brown thumbs. They're uninformed thumbs.
Right.
And so you turn it green by learning. And some of learning comes from experience. A fellow named J.C. Ralston, who was I believe he's in North Carolina, a very well-known horticulturist, he made a statement that if you're not killing plants, you're not really stretching yourself as a gardener. And if anybody knew how to grow a plant, it was J.C. Ralston.
Yeah.
But give yourself permission to try it. in some years, nature throws us curves. So you do everything right, and you still have that.
Yeah, last year for the vegetable garden. I mean, did you have a great vegetable garden?
It was, well, there's a saying that the cobbler's kids go barefoot.
Yeah.
So
Kinda got
when
that.
I find myself constantly on the road going somewhere to talk or do something, and all the other stuff going on, sometimes things get a little bit behind me. But I had some crops that thrived and some that didn't do as well last year.
Yeah, I think, like I've already mentioned it earlier, but if you remember, last spring was such an unusual spring, and that it got so hot so early, and then it just stayed hot. And so for a lot of us, we really, you had, if things aren't doing well, get out that rototiller, Some points, and last year was one of them, for a lot of things, it was just best to till them under, let them start feeding the soil, and then start over again in the fall.
That's a good point.
And that's what really wound up happening with me personally in my home gardens. My fall gardens were much better than my spring gardens. But like I say, it was because I had a lot of failure in the spring, and I just turned it over and said, well, you're going to become you're going to feed soil microbes. So,
I guess this is going to become quote day since we're both dropping quotes out there, but a guy named Jimmy Turner, who used to be the head of the
Jimmy
Dallas
Turner.
Botanical Garden, he said that my gardening success is built on the compost of my failures. And,
that's good.
And I think that's a good way to look at it.
That is very good and very true.
All right. Anything else you wish you knew?
Well, I mean, there's so many things. So I tell people, give yourself permission. Don't be afraid to take chances. Don't admit your failures. Don't be so locked into the rules. But the main thing that you're going to want to do, if you're going to be successful year after year, is you need to journal. And I just truly believe this with all my heart. You've got an article coming out in the next issue where you talk about a variety of squash that you found that produces much more than the yellow squash you were producing.
Twofold.
Twofold. That's incredible.
That is incredible.
With my scatterbrained and with me running and going, if I didn't write that variety down somewhere in a journal and be able to refer back to it, well, when it comes January, when you can still get squash seeds, when you're sitting there going through the catalogs and all, I'd be like, what was that variety that Squash that Skip told me about?
Yeah.
But if you journal, if you write the stuff down, it's going to help you remember those things.
Yeah, and it'll help you go back and remember some of the things that happened in the garden, when they occurred, and it just is a good idea. Some people are paper people.
Right.
They want a notebook, maybe a 3-ring binder, so they can cut out newspaper articles and put them in there, or do other things to add to that journal notebook. Some people are digital,
Right.
And I use the OneNote app, Microsoft OneNote. That's not a commercial for OneNote. It just fits me really well. You can copy stuff from the web, copy it, and when you paste it into OneNote, the URL of where it came from is put in there with it. And so anytime I'm trying to add to that, it's so easy, and I like that version. I'm sure there's some better apps for that, but
Well, you just gave me a OneNote tip. I didn't know that. So,
Yeah.
But there are really great digital apps out there. You can go to the App Store, and there's several of them that are good garden journals.
Right.
I'm just in favor. I don't care if you do it digitally. I don't care if you do it on scraps of paper or whatever
Just
you
do
do. You just need to do it. And to me, a very good example is the squash vine borer. We talk about squash vine borer a lot because if you love yellow squash and you grow it.
most of those words when we talk are not fit for children.
That's
to
right.
hear. Okay.
That is right. And the problem with her is there's really not any good chemical controls for her. And so if you're going to control her, then you're going to use some of these things that we're talking about, some of our management practices and everything to control her. So you're either going to plant early and grow really big plants before you ever put them out,
Right.
or you're going to keep row cover on hand to grow them under cover and do some hand, self-pollination. But none of that matters if you don't know when she's coming.
Yeah.
And so my biggest tip that I tell people, and this is nothing new, I didn't create it, but the number one thing that you can put in your garden is your shadow. That's the number one thing you can do. And if you can regularly go in your garden, and I tell people go in the morning and go in the evening because you're going to see a different set of pests or beneficials, things like that some are going to be out in the morning, some are going to come out in the evening.
Yeah.
And you can go out there, and the only good thing about the squash vine borer is she lets us know when she's there.
Yeah.
So you can hear her. You know, she buzzes around when she's flying, you know.
I've never noticed that.
Yeah,
That's
so
cool.
if you're out there and it's the middle of March and you hear something kind of buzzing around and it's not a honeybee, then you need to start looking under those squash leaves because she's probably there.
It's laying eggs.
And so make a note of that. And after 2 or 3 years, when you start noticing her showing up in your garden, then you'll know, okay, if she's going to be here by March 15th, then I need to have my squash under row cover by March 14th at least, you know. Yeah. And that's just one of those good management techniques. And just FYI, one thing I like about gardeners are very social. And somebody recently told me, I was doing a talk in the Dallas area, and they have like a North Texas Gardeners Facebook group. And they were tracking the squash vine borer on this Facebook group.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so like somebody down in Midlothian would say, okay, I saw one in my garden. And then somebody, you know, up in the central Dallas would say, hadn't seen her yet, but, you know, on the lookout for her. And I thought that was kind of funny, that she is such a pest. I'm telling people to write it down and all, but there are evidently Facebook groups and all that you can get in to track her project or her progress.
That is cool. Well, I'm going to shift a little bit, and that was things you wish you'd known when you started. And this may sound like the same question, and that is, what advice would you give new gardeners now? And so without repeating those things, what kind of things, it's a different time now. We have different products available. We have different varieties and stuff. How do you see that gardeners have gone wrong, and therefore when a new gardener comes in, you steer them straight on topics? So what kind of advice, some listener to the show today, what kind of advice would you give them? They're excited. They want to get into gardening. They may even have already started a little garden this spring. Any thoughts on that?
So one of the things that when I went, I have, like you said, I have a master's in horticulture from A&M. And one of the most eye-opening experiences that I had while I was at A&M is I had to take a greenhouse management course.
Okay.
I had never been in a greenhouse, you know. I mean, horticulture was not my first business or my first line of work. And I found this greenhouse management course fascinating because, you know, I was in my 40s when I got my master's. And so when I walked into that greenhouse, I didn't just see a bunch of plants. I walked in and I was like, my gosh, look at all the sun, look at all the heat, look at all the moisture. How do they keep disease off of these plants? And so it just made me look at it and say, how do these commercial people do it? Because, you know, there's always that saying, I don't care what you're talking about, follow the money. Follow the money. The money is going to tell you the truth if you want to know the truth. Well, if you want to know the truth about horticulture, kind of follow the money. Look at what the commercial people do. You know, Get out, talk to them, join local gardening groups and things like that, and you'll learn about things like the IPM triangle, the integrated pest management thing. And it will tell you, you know, that you can worry about what to spray on this or what to sprinkle on that or whatever, but really, if you step back and take kind of a wider view and a kind of look, the integrated pest management triangle gives you, you know, a base of practices to do, and then you can move up. And finally, the last thing that it says you should do on any of your problems is apply chemicals. That's the very last thing that you should do. But the very first thing you should do or build what you call your cultural practices. And that's kind of what you said earlier, that before you spend a penny on a plant, you should spend $1 on your soil. I mean, too many young gardeners, I understand that sometimes some of these soil additives are expensive or whatever, but they don't have to be. You know, look around, read, find somebody that you trust and understand. So, Skip, I know I've seen pictures of you with your car absolutely full of bags of leaves that you've picked up off of the side of the road.
For the listeners, I want you to, in your mind's eye, imagine a Toyota Corolla carrying 13 bags of leaves.
Yeah. It's on the roof.
It can
it's
be
in
done.
the trunk. It's in the back seat.
It looks like the Beverly Hillbillies heading to California, but
it did. But what was it? Why did you pick those leaves up?
Oh, it's brown gold for the garden.
Brown gold.
The vast majority of what a tree takes up nutrient-wise, not talking about the carbon content, which is in the wood,
Right.
is in the leaves. And
Right.
so when you put a bag of leaves at the curb, you're putting fertilizer at the curb. You're putting compost at the curb. You're putting mulch at the curb.
That's right. Organic matter.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter if it's a leaf. It doesn't matter if it's the stuff that you're collecting on your kitchen counter that you're putting out. You're putting organic matter in that soil. And that's what I think is one of the most misunderstood concepts of how organic gardening works and things like that. But it really doesn't matter if you're doing organic gardening or if you want to call it traditional or commercial gardening, however you want to call it. You need healthy soil. And healthy soil only comes from feeding it. And so we put fertilizer out to feed our plants, but we need to put organic matter into the soil to feed the soil microbes, because that's what really feeds our plants organically are the microbes and the excrement from the microbes and the dead bodies of the small animals and plants and funguses and all that are breaking up and releasing their chemical soup to the soil.
Okay, so in addition to soil, some advice for a new gardener.
Okay, so I think soil goes along with the new garden. But full sun, of course, get as much sun as possible. You just can't go wrong with eight hours of sun. If you don't have it, try to find 6 hours of sun. That's going to be your number one factor to success, especially in a vegetable garden.
Okay.
And so, I mean, there are a lot of the leafy stuff, and you'll learn stuff that through the years the sun will change and all of that. Full sun is first. Soil second. Build your soil first. If you want to be successful, then you need to find the high success crops, and you need to start with those. Okay, so like I've got a young girl that lives down the street from me right now. She's 9. She wanted to have a vegetable garden. And I said, okay, what do you want to grow? And so she told me, well, I want to grow tomatoes. I want to grow cucumbers. You know, I love carrots and all. Luckily, those are all pretty high success crops, as long as Priscilla, her name is Priscilla, and she's 9. As long as Priscilla didn't want to start her tomatoes from a seed in March, she needed to understand she needed to go out and buy transplants, okay? And so her parents took her out. They bought her a couple of cherry tomatoes, because you're going to be much more likely to have a lot of success with a cherry tomato than you are a beefsteak. And so start with transplants and start with high success crops. And like some of the high success crops, like I say, green beans. March 1st, go to the local nursery, buy a pack of green beans, put them out, water them. There's a pretty good chance you're going to get a crop of green beans.
Yeah.
You know, another one that the kids like, you put them out a little bit earlier, but they love carrots. Kids love carrots. Put them out. They take a minute to germinate, but they do germinate. In 3 or 4 months, you're typically going to get some carrots. Potatoes, they're another one that are super simple, you know. So start with high success crops, and understand, this is one thing a lot of people don't understand. Even though it says you can plant tomatoes on March 15th, you need to do a little research and understand they're not talking about planting a tomato seed. You know, they are talking about planting a tomato transplant that by that time hopefully has little yellow flowers on it.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Well,
I'm gonna throw a couple of them in
Okay.
that I would throw into the advice for gardeners, and we come back. I'm sure you got some more, but the size of the garden. People get all excited and they build this monster, and then by June, here the weeds are knee high, and you know they're losing their interest, and so you could start in a 5-gallon bucket with holes drilled in the bottom. I mean, it could be that simple, but start small.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that's.
No, 100%. And so I was talking to a guy the other day, and he said when he started, and he's the only guy I've ever heard tell me this, so that's why it stood out. He said his goal was he wanted to grow one thing that he would eat the first year, and that was his goal. And so he started out in a 5-gallon bucket that he drilled holes in. He went to the store, bought some potting soil, put a tomato in it, and grew a cherry tomato.
Okay.
And that motivated him so that next year he moved on to that second and that third vegetable.
Yeah.
Because you're 100% right. If
Okay.
you bite off more than you can chew, you're not going to be successful.
I'm going to throw one more bit of advice for brand new gardeners in, And this one is a shameless plug for the folks I work for. You have a thing called the AgriLife Extension Office that serves every one of the 254 counties in Texas. You have someone there that can advise you, and they have a lifeblood to the soil lab, a lifeblood to the plant pathology lab. You know what I'm saying? And they can direct you in the right way. And oh my gosh, it is free help. And it makes a difference. And then along with that is the Aggie Horticulture website. It's aggie-horticulture.tamu.edu. But there is 20-something publications on every vegetable you can imagine growing and some you hadn't thought of growing. And you could spend a day just clicking around and realizing everything that's in that website, and that's ready to go to help you along. So I'd put those shameless plugs in, and kind of along the lines of what that basically means is get good research-based advice. Hand in hand with that is a new gardener needs to delete every social media app off their phone because they lie. Everybody's an expert. I see pictures on Pinterest, and I just look at them and start picking them apart. My wife sometimes rolls her eyes at me because it's like, here's these bottles hanging upside down against a white wall, and there's all these tomatoes and everything coming out of them. They did not grow them there. They grew them somewhere else, and they stuck them on that wall, or that wall wouldn't be white if they were splashing soil. But you see what I'm saying. I saw one time, Jay. I'm not kidding you, and it was seeds for sale, and they were multicolored tomatoes on the same bush, and I'm talking neon colors. When we say a purple tomato, it's not really purple, but I'm talking about neon, like blue and green, but it's a green. It's like you bought spray paint. Well, it's just a lie. P.T. Barnum was right. There's a sucker born every minute. And so...
Well, somebody, just so you know, sent me that very ad
did they?
through email, and they said, is this legit? Is this a real thing?
Yeah. I know. It just drives me nuts. But, I know people aren't going to delete all their social media apps, but don't believe them. Don't believe stuff that...
Well, it's what you said. Find who you can trust. Mm-hmm. Find reliable information, because all that stuff that you said at Aggie Horticulture, they haven't grown one tomato. Mm-hmm. They've grown a field full of tomatoes for 3 or 4 years, and they've tested them and all of that, and they've tested them in different situations and all. So you can trust the information that you get from Aggie Horticulture.
And there's some good experienced gardeners in every community that can help you too.
That is true. So you find trustworthiness.
Yeah, there you go.
So.
Well, any other advice for young or new gardeners?
Well, I think as you get a little bit better, one thing, when you put in a new garden, so my little friend Priscilla that's doing her garden, her parents they filled it up with the finest soil and everything that they had. So that soil was ready to grow. It hadn't been depleted or whatever. I think one problem that gardeners have after they've been in the same place for 2 or 3 years, the soil begins to deplete. It begins to get not such a great texture.
The organic matter's breaking down.
Yeah, it's settling, it's doing all of this, and pests find it, If somebody says, how do you have a pest-free garden? I say, well, move it every year, because it takes a while for the pests to find it. But anyway, you got to continue to work that soil. And the other thing that I think gardeners do, you have to learn to water, okay? And you have to learn to feed. I mean, if you're growing annual crops, like we mentioned earlier, they got to be fed. I think I've heard you say you wouldn't want to eat once a month, right? And so, but you can't overfeed. Overfeed can kill. It can kill the soil life and all of that. So you have to learn how and when to feed. You have to learn how to keep that soil rich and productive and loose, because most things that you say require drainage. That's another thing that a lot of gardeners don't realize. And right now I'm talking about, a large raised bed garden. But all of this stuff definitely applies to your potted plants and all too. Every 2 or 3 years, in my opinion, you should be dumping those potted plants out, knocking the soil off, putting those soils back in fresh, good soil. Because in Texas, it just gets so hot, and we constantly water. So you're constantly compacting the soil, leaching nutrients out of the soil, and after 2 or 3 years, that great potting soil that you bought before is just not a great soil anymore. So learn to feed the soil, learn to feed your plants, and learn how to water properly. You know, more people, I love this, more plants die every year from overwatering than underwatering.
Yeah, that's especially true of houseplants.
Yeah, that 100%.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Well, that is cool. Well, we got a little bit of time left, but I'd like to, we go through phases
Right.
as we garden through the decades, and maybe for a while. I remember Bill Adams. He was an extension horticulturist in Houston, and Bill, Bill's still around, but I remember he went through phases in his garden where he'd be very interested in this or that vegetable. I remember he went through a chicken phase where he also, it's like he was interested in every kind of chicken there was and so on.
tried to photograph everyone.
That's right. He's an awesome photographer.
Yeah.
We go sometimes through, we're kind of interested in this, we're kind of interested in that. I'm currently in an okra phase that seems to have gone on for several years now. And anyway, what are your interests now in the garden? What kinds of things do you like to grow? Maybe what are some things kind of recently that you're learning from just being out in the garden?
So I'm transitioning from one, I don't know what you want to call it, the way I used to garden.
Okay.
Used to, and I think a lot of people do this, they start out, especially in the vegetable garden, as a traditional, get that tiller, turn that soil up, mound it up into rows, plant down those rows, and run it that way and fight weeds for the rest of your life. And I did that for a long time. But the more I did it, the more I began to realize I don't think we need to till every year. And so I started going more to a no-till.
Okay.
And then I turned 60. And then when I turned 60, my knees hurt more, my back hurt more. And I said, I think I'm going to get away from this tilling in ground. And now I'm building a complete raised bed.
There you go.
And my absolute dream, is we have 3 cisterns on a couple of barns and a little structure around there. I want to set up this raised bed to try to go and grow off of water capture.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if I'm going to be successful, but I want to manage my plantings. I want to have really good soil. I want to have soil that, retains water and things like that, and I want to try to set it up so that I'm a better steward. I want to be a better steward. I mean, in Texas, we have real water problems. They're only going to get worse, and I think generally gardeners overwater, and so I want to learn to be a better steward of my resources.
Well, you mentioned that no-till. That is also a change for me. When I look through the decades of gardening I've been through, that's a fairly recent one. And the mindset my whole life has been, when you put in a garden, you pound the soil to death with a rototiller, make it all fluffy and plant. And you can garden that way. I mean,
You can.
obviously it works. Been doing it for a long time. But even in agriculture now, the benefits of no-till, of leaving that root system in the ground to decay in the ground, of not constantly turning the soil over, there's just a lot of reasons to do it. But it also, if you do it right, it can even be easier. I own a rototiller, but basically I use it to run down my rows where I pile leaves to decompose in the garden walkways. I use it to stir up that, or if I want to put a little nitrogen into the leaves to speed them up. No-till is a good way to go. I like that.
And I know that it's catching on because I have 2 tillers. I have a great big walk-behind tiller, and then I have a little Manus tiller, which is what I used to use to do the things that you're talking about. I can't give that big tiller away.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Oh, my gosh.
I want it out of my garage. It's a Craftsman. It's great. And everybody's like, I don't till anymore.
Yeah.
I just, So I think that is catching on in the gardening world.
Yeah. It takes a little learning. If those of you listening that think, okay, I'm just going to stop tilling, you need to learn a little bit about, because we still have to prepare the soil. There's a process to
That's
that
right.
whole thing.
And there's still weeds that can take over.
There's
and
still
you have
weeds
to
that can
control
take
them. And
Yeah, that's right.
but,
So what else? Right now, what are you kind of interested in horticulturally? It doesn't have to be in the vegetable garden, but what kinds of things are piquing your attention?
So there's 2 things that I'm kind of excited about this year. So number 1, last year I found a lime green zinnia, and I loved it. I thought it was a cool color. It really looked good. It popped against the other color zinnias. And so I tried to save seed, and so I'm planting these zinnias again for the second time.
Okay.
But why I'm curious about this is because I have so many zinnias. And I replant zinnias every year, but so many come up volunteer. And one thing that I've seemed to learn with zinnias, that evidently that purpley lavender color, that seems to be the dominant color characteristic on the Punnett square. Because because if you put out a row of zinnias that are red, yellow, white, orange, and with a little bit of the lavender ones in year 2 and year 3 of the ones that self-seed, they're all going to be lavender.
Really?
And
I've not seen that.
That's been very interesting to me. So
Okay.
I tried to grow my lime green ones in a different area to try to separate them from the other ones. So I'm kind of excited to see if my separation worked, if I was able to keep the different color genetics out of these. And, I mean, they may be hybrid anyway. Even if I was successful keeping them away from the lavender ones, they may, if they were a hybrid, they may not come back true.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm excited about is I am growing what they call patio open pollinated tomatoes. A gentleman named Craig La Jolla, who's a great tomato breeder in North Carolina.
North Carolina, yeah.
Yeah. He and another lady in Australia started developing these several years ago, and they did a cross-continental breeding program so they could, run 2 and 3 crops a year.
And what Jay's talking about is like above and below the equator.
Right.
So when we're having summer, you're growing tomatoes. When the southern hemisphere has summer,
They're growing tomatoes.
So they're getting like they're speeding up the breeding process.
That's right. They're getting 2 seasons for one. And so, anyway, they call them patio-sized tomatoes. That's fine. They can call them what they want to. But basically, they're determinate tomatoes that produce tomatoes more like the look, flavor, and texture of the heirlooms.
Okay.
So, like if you like Cherokee Purple, but you don't have room to grow a 6-foot tall and 6-foot diameter bush, these supposedly will grow for you in a 5-gallon bucket, and they'll only get 3 to 4 feet tall and wide.
I think, wasn't Craig La Jolla the guy that created Cherokee Purple?
I think he is.
I think he was, yeah.
And
interesting. Well, I'll add on to, I said, what are you interested in now? I think one of the things as you garden longer that often creeps in is plant breeding. And that may seem like a complex thing, but we've got home gardeners all over the country that are playing as part of this big tomato experiment, and they're getting all kinds of stuff that's coming out. I, of course, just learned how to do okra, and so I'm creating my own crosses to create an okra that I have a couple of goals in what I want it to be at the end, but it's fun and it's easy, and you could do that with squash. That'd probably be the easiest one. You can create your own crosses. So yeah, I think that's cool.
That is fun, and you're right. I mean, I think as you do advance in your skill level, you want things, and so you do breeding, grafting, things like that. That do take a little more skill and all do begin to interest you. So
yeah, that
plant propagation.
That is a fun thing to learn.
Yeah, and there's so many ways to do it.
I always tell my Master Gardener classes during the propagation day that we are fixing to make them into very dangerous people. Every arboretum will check your pockets when you leave the property because something might have gotten pinched off or a seed head pulled off or something.
That is true.
By the way, I've talked to garden centers, and I did not realize how much this was going on, but they just say you just can't imagine how many people come in and look at the house plants and pinch something off. That basically is stealing it.
It is.
But seriously, plant propagation is a fun skill.
It is.
That is a cool one.
You mentioned Bill Adams, just FYI. He loves jujubes. He lives close to me, so I have jujubes.
Okay.
And I have one jujube that has 3 different varieties of jujube growing on one piece of rootstock.
There you go.
And
if you learn how to graft and bud, wow, that opens.
Oh, I didn't. He did it.
Oh, he did.
Bill came and did it for me.
Well, that's the way to get things done.
Yeah.
You're kind of like a Tom Sawyer story there.
You go.
You got the fence painted.
That's right.
Well,
by a true pro.
Yeah, by a true pro. Oh my gosh. Any other thoughts? Kind of closing thoughts. regarding what you're interested in right now? And
well, since we just have a few minutes, I just would like to kind of wrap up one of the ways that we feel about gardening.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, there are so many, I don't even know how many millions of people are in Texas,
Mm-hmm.
but they estimate that 1 in 3 people do some kind of gardening in Texas. And that's across the world. I mean, gardening is thought of as the first or second most participated in hobby across the world. And I think because of that, we have a little saying that we talk about in the magazine, that gardening matters. And I really believe that. And I think as gardeners, we're in a unique position to help our community. We can help the state by using low water practices so that we start conserving some of the water resources that we have. But we can also do things like we can take part of our vegetable harvest and take it down to the food bank or share with the shut-in or whatever. So as a gardener, we're really in a great place to improve our community, our
Absolutely.
environment, and our society. So this spring, I'm getting a little worked up here, but get outside, plant, enjoy, the bounty that we're given, and share that bounty. Share with your community, improve where you're at, and do it through gardening.
That is cool. We're biased, but that doesn't mean we're wrong.
That's right.
Okay, I'll just about wrap us up here with a quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson, back in it was late 1800s. I think he said this: "When I go into my garden with a spade and dig a bed, I feel such an exhilaration and health that I discover that I've been defrauding myself of all this time and letting others grow and do for me what I should have done with my own hands."
Yes.
And there, there's another quote that at the end of the day, your fingernails should be dirt. There should be dirt under your fingernails and grass stains on your jean knees or something. It's a wonderful hobby. And Jay, thank you so much. We've been talking with Jay White of Texas Gardener Magazine. So appreciate you coming in here.
Thank you, Skip. I love it.
And give us the website if people want to find out about the magazine.
www.texasgardener.com.
All right. Well, folks, we will be back live again next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's show as much as I have, and look forward to visiting with you and answering your questions next week.
You've been listening to Garden Success with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension horticulturist Skip Richter. Join us again next week as Skip discusses your questions about gardening and landscaping in the Brazos Valley.